Well, hello everybody. I'm Strive the Historian, and welcome to my first episode of the Annals of History. This podcast, I guess you could call it that, will focus on two of my passions, which is history, as you can find in the name, and video games. Further along the line, it might include, other parts of media that I love, which might be, films, mangas, stuff like that. But for now, I'm focusing more solely on video games. And the idea is, it's not just to make, how to say that, an analytical version of games. It's to check out what kind of influences video games have had from history and from culture in general. Now, I know culture is a big word, and you could debate if you can use it like that because video games in themselves are part of our modern culture. But in this case, I'm talking more about I guess not ancient cultures, but traditions, things that have been passed down by our ancestors and that have marked us, that have stayed with us. So, it might be, I don't know, Egyptian culture, Greek culture, all of those cultures that have marked us and that most of us know at least the name of. Of course, I'm not gonna just talk about the obvious cultures. I'm also gonna talk about more obscure stuff that has someone that has had formation in history may know more about than other people. So that might include very old civilizations or very modern civilizations, which we don't really think about. It might also include extremely contemporary, influence. So it might be, like for example, the influence of Art Deco or pop art on the way we see video games and how the idea of the image just took root in our society, where we went from a society where there was a lot of the main media for people that weren't very highly cultivated was mostly either radio or books to the era of films, the era of movies and series and video games. So there's a lot to unpack. Not everything is going to make sense because I mean it's kind of what I like about the podcast format is like I'm going to go on tangents. I'm not going to focus. I'm going to have one or two ideas on each episode. I have no idea how long these are going to last, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll make do with that. Anyways, uh, this is the first episode of the Annals of History, and I hope you guys are, strapped on tight because we're going on a wild ride down, the corridors of our very long and yet very short in terms of scale, history and its influence on modern society and on video games. Now, for this first episode, I must say I was struggling to find just one subject that could, be interesting as an introduction. And I think I was having trouble with it because I was thinking too much about linking one game with, one subject in history. And I found my inspiration by going on Roll20, a very common site for a lot of people now online, a site where you can play a lot of role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games online. And I've been using Roll20 for, well, way over 10 years now. So I'm quite an avid TTRPG player. And so I was like, okay, you know what? Let's do a first subject that is very large. And this first subject is going to be fantasy. So fantasy as a whole is way over, just games. Just even just talking about games. I mean, it's a literary genre, it's a movie genre. It just encompasses pretty much every single form of media that is currently out there. However, I'm gonna right now talk specifically about video games. So taking examples from, like, for example, Fable, Baldur's Gate, games like that. But every point I'm making right now can kind of be applied to other kinds of media outlets. So fantasy compared to, the Middle Ages, for example, because at the start, at its core, fantasy, eh, high fantasy, dark fantasy, no matter which genre, comes from a very romanticized version of the Middle Ages, which is what's so interesting to me because having studied the Middle Ages a lot, we have a ton of misconceptions on this period, especially in Europe. I mean, we have misconceptions in, Middle Ages in other parts of the world because, of course, Middle Ages in general, like all of our historic periods that you tend to learn in school, at least for Westerners, kind of only apply to the Western world. If you take Africa, if you take Asia, we have had some very different development cycles, I guess you could call them. But here we're going to focus on fantasy, and we're going to focus on, the Middle Ages, mostly in Western and Eastern Europe. We could do tangents on other parts of the world. That's not a problem. But I don't know as much on those parts of the world, I'll be honest. So I'm not gonna try to, talk too much about things I don't know. I think that's one major point I want to focus in on this podcast. I know podcasts generally are just an outlet where people can talk about pretty much anything they want, and that's super cool. But I've also like done research. I've been, at a certainly high level in university, and so I hate talking without having done research. So, we may do episodes on, influence of like Chinese, Japanese, Thai, ancient times. We'll see. But for now, yeah, more Western, Eastern Europe. Anyways, the Middle Ages are an extremely complex and fascinating period. We don't really count them as just one period as a whole. The general distinction that you'll see in most, research and even now, school books and stuff like that will be that you distinguish between high and low Middle Ages. And no, it's not like you think. High Middle Ages is the start of the period, low Middle Ages is the end of the period. High Middle Ages is basically everything that happens after the fall of Rome. It's how we determine it. Of course, periods don't really start at a set date, but that's, generally a point where we agree that we change periods. There's a shift in the paradigm of society, which is sufficient for us to talk about another period and another way of thinking. So, what's so interesting about the High Middle Ages? Well, the High Middle Ages is where actually a lot of myths come from. It's where, all of the Knights of the Round Table, stuff like that, comes from this period because oh, I forget names. They were written in the 10th, 11th century. So we're like, we're still in the end of the High Middle Ages, and it's clearly inspired from this period of change where there is a change of religion. We pass from multiple kinds of religions at the scale of Europe to one or two religions that tend to impose themselves, which will be Christianism, Judaism. There still, of course, is paganism in many parts of Europe, especially, for example, in north. Like, Vikings had a very specific religion that fit none of the other religions. But if you take Western Europe, you have this uh, quick transition. Well, quick, it takes a few centuries, but still, relatively quick transition from a bundle of religions to one central religion that binds them, which will be, in this case, Christianism. And that will definitely change the way societies interact and the way people interact. So we're going from a multitude of polytheistic religions to one monotheistic religion, which tends to give structure. Because compared to many religions, like for example Celtic religions that are very disorganized, there's no clear hierarchy. It's very tribal based basically. It's not exactly true because it depends which part of Celtic religions, but Christianism clearly has a goal of being extremely structured, with the Pope at its summit, and especially after the Council of Nicaea in 543. I don't want to cite wrong dates, but I hope that I'm right. I'll be honest. I need to check my dates more often. But anyways, yeah, I think that's what I first Council of Nicaea. Oh no, I'm so wrong. That's 325. But 325 isn't the one I want. It's the second one I want. Yes. Yes, we're doing research live. That's all. Okay. 787. Yeah, so 525 is an Nikkei. That's fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So you see the struggle of actually, loving history and being terrible with dates. That's one of my issues. One of my many issues. But anyways, so one of these things that you will often see in fantasy is one of these, I guess, tools that you will see is the presence of the church. And sometimes you will also see the idea of different churches fighting inside of either the same church or, with other religions, because Christianism kind of also included, the idea that you fight heathens. You don't really accept paganism or, other religions. Just say, just come work for me. Just come believe in my religion because your religion is so wrong. So that's an important thing that is really present, I guess, in Christianism, and is also present in a lot of fantasy. Religion becomes a centerpiece of um, not only of personal belief, but it becomes a tool of power, and it is clearly seen in a lot of fantasy, masterpieces, where you can clearly see the importance religion takes, and sometimes the opposition compared to, smaller, more less organized religions. Now, there's a few games that clearly have this opposition with, the church taking place, the church kind of taking holds, and where it's normal to have a church. There's no names anymore, especially in JRPGs. You tend to have, like in the Final Fantasies, you tend to have a church, or you have church to, named gods, but without, except if they're part of the main lore, doesn't really matter. However, one of the things that tends to really crystallize itself from high Middle Ages, from the period of high Middle Ages, is the struggle between old religions and new religions. For example, I mean, one of the perfect examples is the idea in Assassin's Creed. And the idea itself of Assassin's Creed is that Templars and, the new religions is monotheism are here for to take over, to control the world, and They are opposed by people believing in older religions, forgotten religions that still have a certain degree of power. However, they are waning in front of a more structured and organized society. And I think Assassin's Creed, especially, is one of these series that really showcases this opposition. In Valhalla too, there is this clear opposition between a more natural, maybe not organic, but wild nature that came from before the Middle Ages, and then you have this invasion from a new order, an order that is more structured and that wants to lead to control, not just order but control. And so that's one of these high notes that is taken from the High Middle Ages, which is interesting because if you look at the High Middle Ages, what you will see more is, historically, is struggles inside of Christianism. Because since we take the fall of the Roman Empire, so you take 450 basically to situate yourself. You start in 450 and you'll end the High Middle Ages around the 11th or 12th century. What you will see is a religion that struggles to get one creed, one way of doing things. One of the oldest forms of Christianism is Arianism, that notably appeared in the Middle East, and that was targeted because it had a very different, ways of thinking compared to, everything that evolved in Rome. The main church that became Catholicism was the Church of Rome. It was what came of the first Council of Nicaea in 325, when the emperor decided to switch the religion of the entire empire to Christian. And that's really where you will see struggles because, for example, so you will have the Aryans that will be outlawed because they're not orthodox, they're not part of the main religion. Then you will have the schism between orthodoxy and Christianism. You'll have the Cathar heresy and the east of France that will be really important and will take an entire crusade to actually defeat. And so you have this internal struggle that can be shown sometimes. You see a lot of power struggles inside in fantasy games, sometimes in religious aspects, but generally in fantasy, except for very specific games like Assassin's Creed, for example, religion is more of a set piece. I'd say it's a neutral aspect or one that is very fixated, and it's very interesting because it wasn't the case at all in the High Middle Ages. However, if you look in the lower Middle Ages, so when we switch from basically the High Middle Ages is the phase where Europe is getting to change and stabilize itself. By the time the Low Middle Ages come out, a lot of the bigger countries that you see now, the modern countries, have been formed in some shape or form. That means that you have France, you have England, you will have the Irish Kingdom, which was at the time Normand. You will have Aragon and Castile, which will become Spain and Portugal. You have the Italian cities, which are still at this point and until very late fractured. But you have all of this. And so you have this center of Western Europe that has solidified. You have also all of the Roman, the oh, sorry, I'm trying to remember the name in English. The Holy Roman Empire. I think that's how you, yeah, that's how it's called in English. That takes over most of what is now Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands. So you have a lot of the power players, let's say, that are stabilized in some shape or form, and so the lower Middle Ages are more what you'd imagine. It's a lot of territorial wars. It's a lot of nations getting stronger, and it's you're not playing on the same scale anymore. And I mean the games that of course get this aspect the best are games like Crusader Kings. And later you'll have Europa Universalis, but Europa Universalis was already the Renaissance period of of Western Europe. But if you take a look at a game of Crusader Kings 2, for example, or even Crusader Kings 3, you can see actually how things evolve. You go from a lot of tribal and disorganized groups to very organized kingdoms. You go from just a simple, maybe fiefdom system to an entirely vassalic organization. And so the game has changed. There's a lot more politics. There's a lot more minutia. The what we call the Society of Princes has created, and what we call the Society of Princes in history is basically this how would you say that the Society of Princes was this concept that basically even though every country had its own I can't find my words, its own advantages to gain. Every country hated itself, let's be honest. You still had to maintain royalty, and since royalty was maintained by blood, you had to marry with people from other countries, which meant a lot of alliances through marriages, which meant that the entire region was never in total war because there were always alliance games that allowed them to stay alive even though there was a lot of shenanigans. Again, in fantasy you can see a lot of those power plays, a lot of those more high level, I guess you could say, uh, wars, even though at the lower level, especially when you looked at, for example, dukes, counts, etc., they would still fight each other because, they were basically vassals to the bigger player, which was a king. But, between each other, they could absolutely fight each other as long as they paid their due, as in this sense. The main as a man, because the biggest thing for the king wasn't really the money, it was the men. It was the military power that was important. So as long as they sent the necessary number of men, the king didn't really mind much that there was internal fighting. Again, in the lower Middle Ages, this calmed down a bit, but there was still a lot of fighting. It's something that, for example, if you've played Witcher 2, um, the start of Witcher 2 is very reminiscing of what could actually happen in the Middle Ages. Higher or lower, probably more higher, uh, where you just have one duke that decides to attack another and just take over its entire fiefdom, all of its titles, because he just killed the guy. So that was pretty. But then again, it wasn't. Yeah, I guess the one difference, the one thing that people tend to get wrong, especially in video games, especially in earlier video games, because now historic consultants are more common, especially on games like again, I'm gonna cite them again because they're very common. Assassin's Creed, but Assassin's Creed is trying to actually be historically accurate. But even like like games like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, that came out recently. One of the things that tends to get wrong, and I'm not talking about magic, I'm not talking about all of this, because this was very much part of especially the high Middle Ages, like folk traditions, even though there was, Christianism was taking root. Traditions, beliefs in magic, in trolls, in orcs, etc., were very much real and very much a part of common life. So this is pretty much fine. I mean, if you check, for example, Britain, in France, not Great Britain, Britain, you will see a very much thriving culture of the magical, thriving culture of the the fey worlds, for example, of the idea that there is, gremlins, that there is stuff like that that exists in nature and that can appear at any point, and that is besides Christianism, because it's not about religion; it's about personal beliefs. So this isn't a problem at all in fantasy. I think one of the things that is more uh, often wrong, especially in video games, is how bloody and how dark the Middle Ages were. For a long time, and even now, you can still hear it from time to time. The Middle Ages have been considered as the Dark Ages. We've talked a lot about it as a period where humanity didn't improve, didn't progress. We even, went back, receded. We lost art, we lost music. We became animals again somehow. You don't really know how, but that's how it's been described to us when we were kids, for example. It's really it seems to be really rooted in belief that the Middle Ages were a very bad period for humanity, when in reality it absolutely wasn't. Culture thrived in the Middle Ages. It just was in a very different format. For example, just like in ancient Greek times, bards were the main martyrs of culture. There was a very big oral culture about music, about stories, stuff like that. So the flow of information, for example, didn't stop. There were still merchants. There were still, for example, the great. Give me a second because I need to I need to. So sometimes I'm French from the start, so you'll know. Yes, the great fairs, for example, of the Middle Ages, were incredibly culturally diverse and brought, Western Europe and even Eastern Europe together. So that's the one thing that we get the most wrong in in fantasy media, and especially in video games, because what sells in video games, or the fact that we are violent, the fact that we kill people, because it's kind of basic. It's part of if you have enemies, you need to kill them. Sure, there was a lot of banditism, but that was also the fact. It was also a thing in ancient Greece. If you read a minimum of ancient Greek writers, you will realize that ancient Greece was very much not safe. There were a lot of people willing to kill you on the road. So that's that doesn't really work. So in general, I think that's the one thing that was influenced not by the period itself, but by the vision that we've had since the end of the 19th century of the Middle Ages, and actually from before, because the reason why the Middle Ages were branded as Dark Ages was because we had the Renaissance. And during the Renaissance, artists, philosophers, and basically people that had the knowledge decided to go back to the classics, to what they then branded as classics, which was Greek and Latin literature, uh, absolutely ignoring the fact that these Greek and Latin literature went through Arab hands to be saved, which was a miracle in itself. But that's another problem entirely. And they decided that everything that came before them, between those masters that we were studying and them, was just wasted time. It's not true. It's absolutely untrue. There were a lot of creations. There was a lot of art. There's beautiful, magnificent art, especially religious-related art, has exploded in in the Middle Ages, because the one good I mean, I'm not criticizing religion. That's not my goal here. One of the very good things about religion was that, since it was so structured and generalized, images started to circulate a lot, and representations of angels, of Jesus, of people like that were distributed to the people. And so art was part of religion. It was deeply rooted in religion. There was also more free art, especially when you look in poetry. There was a lot of poetry. There were a lot of ballads. There was, I mean, all of the, as I said at the start of this episode, the Knights of the Round Table, all of this literature came from the Middle Ages for a reason. It was an incredible period, and which deserves to be, studied. Uh, it isn't my field of specialty. I'm normally specialized in ancient times. However, I have done also, a lot of classes in medieval history, and it's an incredible period. So yeah, in the end, I think the one thing that especially games do wrong is imagine that everything is bad. You can especially see it in, for example, I think one of the games that has this very impressive aesthetic of the Middle Ages, and it's not entirely wrong either, but it is very dark, is the Witcher series, especially the Witcher 3. When you go into towns, you very much see a contrast between rural areas that are very dangerous. That's how they describe, with a lot of monsters, a lot of things like that, which I guess represent, also bandits. We have a very negative image, which is really impressive, because when you look, for example, at travel records from the Middle Ages, and even without talking low Middle Ages, I'm talking high Middle Ages, we have people that basically traveled the entirety of Europe over a few years and then came back. They weren't sure if they were going to come back, but that was fine, because it was, a different way of life. And so the roads weren't less safe than before, and they weren't they weren't safer after. Uh, but there was definitely a lot of poverty, a lot of issues in the Middle Ages. I'm not saying it was an incredible, it was a perfect period. Far from it. I mean, there was a thing called the Black Plague that was in the Middle Ages, and definitely the Black Plague got this bad because personal hygiene was virtually non-existent. But that was also, I mean, that was also the case in ancient times. I mean, the Romans and Greeks were relatively clean because of public baths and, this kind of culture, I guess you could say. But it's not like the Middle Ages were that much worse, especially in rural areas. You could pretty much do like an equal comparison. It would be the exact same between the Middle Ages and ancient times. So yeah, I guess my point here is Middle Ages weren't that dirty. They weren't that violent. They weren't that aggressive. I guess is my point. But that's just one of the things that got wrong in fantasy. A lot of things are, especially in recent video games, a lot of things are kind of done right compared to Middle Ages, especially in terms of influence. Like when you see, for example, when you compare for again with The Witcher series is it's one of the more recent series that everybody's heard about, let's be honest, in fantasy. And that is definitely anchored in the medieval period. Like there's no, there's no discussing it. It's not like it's on the fringe with like the Renaissance period. No, no, no. Clearly, all of the Witcher games are in a sort of middle age, and there's a lot of things that they do right. They do right a lot of representations of towns. You have a lot of towns that, for first, you have a lot of towns that aren't actually towns. They're just basically uh, castles, and inside a castle you have, you have the rich population, and then you have the markets. And if there is issues, the poor population will just gather inside of the castle. That was very common, especially in the higher middle ages. And so that's a very good representation, for example. uh, in terms of cities, for example, I can't remember the name of the city. I mean, a lot of the cities in The Witcher are quite well represented. You see a lot of the filth, you see a lot of elements like that, but you also see a beginning of a structure. You see generally high walls around the cities, which aren't necessarily made of stone, unlike people think. Stone were more often left for castles. However, some cities did have stone walls. Often there was also, just wooden walls, and pike fences, stuff like that. So and there were also open seas that also existed. That's not a problem. So, in terms of landscape, The Witcher does a pretty damn good job of representing what could, uh, especially more if you took like if you took the Holy Roman Empire. I guess that would be a very good representation of what could happen in the Holy Roman Empire. And again, one of the incredible things that fantasy does is revive and reinvent traditions and myths, because myths are an incredible part of the Middle Ages. Now, one of the coolest things that I tend to find about fantasy is how it keeps managing somehow to reinvent itself, because after Tolkien, after all of the Lord of the Rings, after Game of Thrones, after big series like that, you could imagine somehow that it's enough. We've pretty much, we've done everything. We've talked about Norse gods, we've talked about Celtic gods, we've talked about more sovereign gods. We've even gone to like more lands in the eastern seaboard, stuff like that. So it should be enough, right? But no, no. Every time we manage to reinvent something, to kind of reinvent the wheel. And that's one of the things that I love the most about fantasy and in video games, because especially in video games, you don't just create a story, you don't just create characters, you create visuals. And that's one of the coolest things with the improvement in graphics in recent years is how artists, how scenarists, and 3D designers, everything like that, how they imagine myths. and sometimes you can clearly see, influence from older texts, and sometimes you can see influence from other pieces of media. For example, just characters like I don't know, like Norse gods, etc., have evolved a lot, quite a lot in media and in video games, and they've kind of they've become their own, their own, like, how do I say that? Basically, they've evolved with time. They've evolved with each iteration, each modification, and it's really interesting because every time they come from, either what the artists have heard, how they imagine it, how they imagine that they can improve on the design, and so it's pretty incredible to see all of this kind of come to life, one of the things that I enjoy the most is definitely to see. Okay, so this is, yeah, this is a game on, like, let's check out recent fantasy game. Okay. Okay, so for example, Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, it's Baldur's Gate. Pretty much, they've already, like, you can't really do anything about it because they've set their entire aesthetic a long time ago. That's one of the things about Baldur's Gate. Of course, it evolves. I've personally not played Baldur's Gate yet, Baldur's Gate 3 yet, because my PC is far from enough to run it. But that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But for example, let's see. What do we have? Let's analyze a game randomly. Uh, uh, I guess I don't know. Like, okay, let's, for example, the Middle Earth series. So Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War. I don't know if you guys have played it. It's very fun games. It's very kind of, I guess you could say, brain dead because it's very repetitive, but it's also very interesting, and it's all based on, the Lord of the Rings. It's all based on Tolkien's work, and Tolkien based most of its work on Nordic mythology. That was one of his biggest influences, and it's really interesting to see the evolution in design from, what we can see, for example, in the movies, in the Lord of the Rings movies, and what you can see now. When was it? Lord of the Rings, the first movie. Again, I don't know dates. Lord of the Rings one movie. Let's see, when was it? So the first movie was in 2001. So let's see, from 2001 to Shadow of War, which was in 2017. So 16 years have passed. And of course, video games and movies are very different media, especially since, video games are all CGI. So, I mean, all CGI, all 3D models, it's all invented, I guess you could say. So, it's not the same vision at all, and you can clearly see a difference in design, a difference in approach, uh, not only from, like, monsters, enemies, characters, but also from, landscapes. Even though it's kind of supposed to be I mean, similar areas. It's supposed to be in the same world. It's the same when you see the evolution of, for example, in Final Fantasy. You go from Final Fantasy, 1 to 15. Of course, there's an improvement in graphics, but, even from 14 to 15, the evolution in god design, because while Final Fantasy bases itself a lot on, Japanese mythology, and a ton of different influences, for some reason, the god system, the idea that you can summon gods, always includes a few gods that are very Nordic resembling, or that come from cultures that you don't really know why it's there, but it's fine. It's just a video game. They can do whatever they want. And then you look like for example, Tribes of Midgard, which was released like I'm not even sure it's entirely released. I don't know if it's a pre-release or if it's which is has a very different aesthetic again entirely, but it's the same characters, and it's such a cool idea to see this evolution, this permanent evolution that there is in gaming, and the idea of having to at each iteration of the same characters, of the same influences, okay, how do we make it look different? How do we change the rules? And it's so interesting, and it's why I love gaming now. I love gaming, in this day and age, because we have this possibility. We can absolutely see an evolution, and not only an evolution, but sometimes entire changes, entire shifts, because it's a different artist, it's a different scenarist. So we can use the same base. We can say, okay, let's take all of the Nordic gods. Let's take all of the, let's take the Christian church. Okay, just the Christian church. Okay, so you have God, you have Jesus, you have all of these characters. Yeah, but we're gonna do it our way, and that's so interesting. That's so it's so cool to imagine what people are gonna think about next and how they are gonna reinvent, how they are gonna I don't know how to say that in a different way. How we're gonna I don't know. It's just every time a new beginning, pretty much, pretty much. All right, back from a little hydration break because talking a lot makes me thirsty. Anyways, where were we? What fantasy does right? I was checking out, a few games while drinking because I was like, man, you really didn't do any preparation for this, but that's fine. I wanted to talk about one game in particular, and one aspect that people tend to get right when they do fantasy games, through compared to the Middle Ages in general, and that's Diablo 3. So Diablo in general is extremely atmospheric, and which is incredible. I love Diablo 3. I've played it way too much. Uh, and one of the coolest things that is present in Diablo 3, and one of the things that I think they get right, is buildings, and especially churches. So, one of the biggest things in Western Europe, especially, that, you know, shows the dedication of people from this period is churches, cathedrals, any place of religious power, and it shows how much how important religion was in this period. So what I mean by that is that every civilization and every generation kind of had its its big monuments, its big kind of I don't want to say obsession because that's not right, but it's big, the things that they built, the things that have lasted, the thing that we remember. And for the Middle Ages, the one thing that people tend to remember, because literally any place you go in Europe you will see, is cathedrals. And uh, cathedrals are this kind of it's this kind of monuments that kind of defy expectations, because a lot of cathedrals took multiple generations to be built. They are incredibly beautiful in terms of architecture. Like when you see the equilibrium that is actually a cathedral, how it was built, how in- incredibly intelligent architects were, and masons also. You realize that it was an incredibly important part of medieval society, and it is generally showcased correctly in video games, even though sometimes we get a little crazy, when you check out more more very fantasy games. I mean, like Bayonetta, like Darksiders, stuff like that, where you have cathedrals that are like 12 kilometers long. That's not a problem. However, there's still the what is conferred, what is given each time is the idea of this building is bigger than just one man. It's bigger than just one person deciding, hey, I'm gonna build that today. No, it's really about showcasing the, I guess, the strength of a religion. Honestly, it is what it is. It is to represent how important religion was for these people and how ready they were to invest in it, and to invest in it to the point that, like like in Egypt, with the pyramids, you're ready to never actually see it complete because you would die before it was over. So yeah, Diablo 3, for example, has some incredible Gothic designs that I love. Of course, I mean, other games also do Gothic. Yeah. Games like The Witcher have some pretty great designs, especially some designs that are rare. Like they don't only have Gothic design, is what I mean. They have some later designs. Assassin's Creed had some incredible designs that were especially worked on by history consultants. So honestly, if you want to have fun with history, even if you don't know everything about it, Assassin's Creed is an incredible series, and while it isn't always accurate, it isn't always, and it's not a documentary, but they try to get things right, which is very impressive, and it's one of the things I like about this series in particular. But yeah, I guess the one adjective I would use in general to describe cathedrals in video games is grandiose, and even sometimes oppressing, because it's so big, it's so majestic, it's so it goes further than human. It's almost inhuman because it's so big in design, and uh, I think that's just a very correct choice from a lot of video games, because visually it's striking, and it was a part of medieval culture. It was a part of what was important to people of this era, even from the start of the high Middle Ages. I mean, the first cathedrals were the first churches are very early. The first cathedrals, they're a bit later. I think the first cathedrals that were considered as cathedrals were the 7th century. And again, I don't want to give wrong information. So anything I say that I clearly don't seem especially sure about, especially about dates, you can of course go check out on Google yourself. This is the first episode, so I'm a bit kind of freewheeling it because I just want to test it out and see if anyone is interested in this. But if things work out, I'll do a bit more research before actually releasing an episode. So we'll see. Anyways, where was I? Yes, of cathedrals. I mean, in general, places of power. The Elder Scrolls does an amazing job with places of power. Even though one of the interesting choices of the Elder Scrolls in general is that it's a medieval setting, but still with a polytheist religion. However, how to say that? You can clearly see the Elder Scrolls is one of these interesting series where religion actually plays a role, and it plays an active role. And for example, if I mean, I haven't played all of the Elder Scrolls. I haven't played Arena or Daggerfall because my eyes burn, but that's fine. Um, but if you play Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, just these three, you will clearly see an evolution in time and an evolution in religious aspects that is incredibly interesting. For example, when you play Oblivion, you are uh, playing, it's the end of the Might of the Empire. You have, and everything is actually a religious war, kind of, because it's basically the good gods versus the bad gods. It's it's literally how you can describe the basic of the synopsis of Oblivion. And what is so interesting to me is when you go to Skyrim, and so when you go to Oblivion, you have the ascension to godhood from um, is it that where he ascends to godhood, Uriel Septim? No, Uriel's before. Yeah, my bad. I'm mixing my dates up. But anyways, you have kind of the proof of the might of the empire, resisting against demons. You have the idea that the empire is still strong, and that the the imperial religion is still strong. That's a very important factor in the end of Oblivion, because everything is linked to Aedra versus Daedra. And then you arrive in Skyrim, and one of the first things that they show you is how, after losing, the empire loses its religious freedom, and it loses the capacity to be strong through religion. And with the ban of Uriel Septim's worship, that is fought hard against by the Stormcloaks, you can clearly see that religion has a very direct impact, not only in the political lives, sorry, the political lives of people, but also in their how do I say that? In the political power, which is what's so interesting, because yeah, in general, The Elder Scrolls is one of the few series that does this right. Religion has an impact that is much farther than just theoretical or philosophical. Religion is power, and that is one of the key features of the Middle Ages, of the medieval period, uh, because especially after the consolidation of the church by give me a second. I need to remember the name of this pope because it's important. It's incredibly important. Oh my god. Oh, I'm gonna. That's probably gonna be something I'm gonna do a lot if I continue the series, where I just go look at something because I don't remember. Sorry about that. Uh, how? What's his name again? So it's the church's reform at the 11th it's during the 11th and 12th century that I remember, when basically the Pope gains much more than religious power. He gains secular power. He gains power over not only the powerful but also the poor, basically. Yes, Gregory 7. Thank you very much, my brain. So, in this period, so it starts in 1085, the Gregorian Reform. Of course, you've heard about it. I've also heard about it. I studied it, but anyways, um, the Gregorian Reform marks a new a new step in the story of Western Europe, where um, churches and religion stops just being. I mean, it was always political in some shape or form, but it starts being almost an independent power to the point that the Vatican has its own territory, and basically the voice of the Vatican is low in some areas of the world, which was not unheard of, but it was quite rare. It was quite, it was quite, yeah, quite rare. So, of course, it wasn't the first time, especially if you look at Eastern, history, the the importance of Buddhism in political power is incredible. It's an incredible thing to study. However, again, as I said at the start of the episode, I won't talk much about Eastern history because I'm not knowledgeable enough about it, and I don't want to say absolute, you know, mistakes. Uh, Here, at least, I can say, okay, I know about it. I may be wrong on the dates, but I know about it. So, anyways, yes, The Elder Scrolls, excellent series for that. It shows the waning and waxing power of churches, of religion across eras, and how important it is to the overall plot. Last thing I want to finish on. Uh, it doesn't really matter, but I have to say that. One thing that I love is weaponry. I'm a big fan of medieval weaponry, mainly because I've studied a lot of them for tabletop RPGs to create, more quirky characters that didn't just use, a broadsword and a shield. So I studied them a lot, and I realized that even though there's always a big variety of weapons, there's always a big diversity of, you know, unique weapons, named weapons in video games, stuff like that. We invented so many weird weapons in uh, in history, especially in the Middle Ages, that it's weird. Like stuff like if you check out like early rifles, for example, we have a few examples. We don't know if they were ever used, but we have a few examples of axe bayonets. Who invented the axe bayonet? Like seriously, who invented an axe bayonet? But stuff like tridents, stuff like very specific sword forms. There's so many variations of weapons that sometimes show in video games, and sometimes you realize that there's more inspiration to be done, guys. You can go farther. You imagine that you've gone way too far. But the truth is, when we want to be quirky and invent new things, we can. So that's my kind of my last tangent. Video games have inspired themselves a lot more of real weapons than what people think. I don't have many examples on hand, but I mean the usual culprits that people imagine more are fake because they're from Eastern culture. Chakrams exist. Um, Shurikens exist, even though they weren't used as we imagine. Uh, but even in more European cultures, scimitars, tridents did exist as weapons. Yes, this was a thing. Guard breakers were a thing. Gauntlets with guard breakers. A lot of stuff. If you look on the internet, you say no, that's impossible. It can't exist, and you realize that it did exist. We invented the stupidest things sometimes because we're like, all right, but what if I do this? You know. So yeah, last tangent. Uh, I guess, last point I wanted to make. Uh, we've been influenced a lot more by actual real history than what we imagine. And we might have thought we invented weapons, for fantasy points that actually just existed already. So that's that's part of the cool thing with fantasy meeting real life sometimes. Anyways, this is the end of the first Annals of Estory. I hope you enjoyed. I don't know if I'll do more. It depends on if people like it. I'll just try this episode on a very select uh, people first, people in which I trust. And if they tell me that's pretty cool, I'll try again. And if they tell me that's just shite, mate, I'll just stop there. That's fine. I'll have tried at least. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Uh, I'm not sure either how I'm probably gonna do this first as YouTube videos with just simple background stuff like that. Maybe if it works, we can, maybe do a Spotify thing. I have no idea. I don't know how it works. I don't know if you upload to Spotify. I have no idea. I've never done it. So, who knows? Maybe in the future. But yeah, thank you for listening up to this point if you're still here. And I hope you have a nice day, and I'll just see you next time in the halls of history.